You know, it's just my luck that just after I post a video saying we need to wait for Blizzard to announce what we'll see in Legion, Blizzard announces a whole bunch of what we'll see in Legion. I was actually going to post a video about my thoughts about their information right away, but then I realized that my talent grid maker had been languishing with no updates for over a year, and I could probably do more good for the community by updating that than by making another video. So that's what I've been up to lately. The new Legion icons are in that tool, though they could add new ones at any time, but I still need to create most of the default PvP talent grids. Fortunately, the ability to make 6-row grids is still a capability of the editor. Unfortunately, it's getting harder and harder to keep up with the changes. Literally, between the time when I started editing the Frost Death Knight PvP grid and the time when I began editing the Unholy Death Knight PvP grid, they changed the icons on me. I couldn't believe it. They're actually posting information faster than I can react to it. Despite that, I'd like to talk about my thoughts about what's been revealed about Legion so far, even while knowing that the very act of talking about it is likely going to summon more changes or announcements so instantly you'll think I play a Warlock instead of a Paladin and that I just used a Soul Shard. I think I'll start with Discipline and my concerns about it. First of all, healers all have high DPS if you go by the numbers on Wowhead. Of course, numbers are the last thing Blizzard tunes, so take that with a grain of salt. But even if those numbers are accurate, will non-disciplined healers be DPSing occasionally while healing? If not, Discipline still brings more to the table than other healers, though one thing worries me about Discipline. They lack a multi-target damage tool at baseline. They have a few talents to help with that, but well, if you've watched my videos, you know what I'm going to say about that. Talents shouldn't be necessary to fill in a gap like that in a spec's kit, and for a spec that's going to be a hybrid DPSer, they should have a variety of DPS tools that includes multi-target damage spells. As for Holy Paladins, which you know I'm going to spend the most time on, I am very pleased that I still have Denounce, and I finally have Consecration back, which I have pined for since Mists of Pandaria came out. I'm very pleased about that, although I hope it ends up being based on spell power and not on attack power, at least for Holy. Apart from that, though, the melee system for Holy that I'd speculated about in my last video almost doesn't exist, but not quite. You can spec yourself to make Crusader Strike help you heal, and I love that. But I worry that there are too many plus percentage healing talents in the Holy Paladin talent grid. I mean, look at this. You can get 12% extra from Mastery, which you can buff by another 12% with Crusader Strike, and then another 24% on top of that with Beacon of the Lightbringer, and then another 10% on top of that with Aura of Light. Assuming Aura of Light stacks multiplicatively and the rest stack additively, that's a 62.8% buff. And that's not even getting into what our cooldowns can do, like Aura Mastery, Avenging Wrath, and Tower of Radiance. Yes, Tower of Radiance is a cooldown in Legion that boosts the healing we do to our beacon, and that copies everyone else's healing to the beacon as well. Take that, plus the Aura of Light talent, and you see that not only can we boost our own healing to that extent, we can affect the healing everyone else does. You know, it's one thing to dominate the healing charts by being at the top of them all the time, but it's another thing to dominate them by deciding where everyone else is going to be on those charts. Maybe that's why Blizzard didn't feel the need to give us an AoE heal that doesn't have a cooldown. Yeah, it's like Blizzard traded in our always there AoE healing with Holy Radiance for an always there AoE damage spell in Consecration, and this is not a trade that I'm in favor of. Literally, every other healer in Legion has a multi-target heal with no cooldown or a very short cooldown, except for Holy Paladins. This is like a total reversal of the AoE damage issue that I've been complaining about for the last several years. If there's one thing playing World of Warcraft since vanilla has taught me, it is that abilities matter. Abilities determine what your class or spec can and cannot do, and with this setup we cannot group heal very effectively compared to other healers. Now, if you watch my old Staticalism video from the WoW Then and Now series, you'll see that healers were very specialized all the way back in Wrath of the Lich King, and Blizzard wanted raid leaders to be able to take the player, not the class, which meant that Blizzard needed to de-specialize healing and give Holy Paladins some AoE healing tools for the first time. That's where Light of Dawn and Holy Radiance came from. What worries me is that with all the class identity Blizzard is trying to infuse into each class and each spec, Blizzard will forget the lessons they learned in Wrath of the Lich King, and they'll create a metagame where raid leaders can't take the player, not the class. It wouldn't take much to fix this issue. Maybe slapping a Diablo 3 style heal over time on Consecration would be enough, and what with our new mastery, a healing version of Consecration would fit with our kit extremely well. I'm very much hoping that the extensive testing they'll be doing for these changes will be enough to tell them that Holy needs another AoE heal in their kits. One more thing that bugs me is that Speed of Light is no longer available to Holy, or to any Paladins really. I figure that, with the buff we get from getting closer to healing targets, it'd make more sense for us to have an ability that lets us get closer to them quickly. Then again, considering we'll practically be healing pimps with the current setup, maybe we don't need anything to make us better at what we do. Regarding this new mastery, I like the concept, but I worry that it won't interact well with raid encounter design. If the encounter is set up so that players cluster a lot, then bam, Holy Paladins are awesome and therefore a must-have. If the encounter is set up so that players don't cluster much at all, then bam, Holy Paladins are suboptimal and therefore raid leaders need to leave them behind. While it's true that min-maxing a raid is always an issue and there will always be slightly suboptimal specs, the fact that so much of our healing output will depend on proximity to our targets means that encounter design is going to have a huge effect on how powerful we are. This may not be a good idea for a new mastery, but I'm not sure what would be a better idea. As for Retribution, they are now the only spec with Holy Power. I'm not sorry to see Holy Power go as a Holy Paladin. The heals I had in Warlords were way too homogeneous. They only varied slightly in terms of cast time, how many targets they affected, and who it's most efficient to cast them on. It's not like the old days in Cataclysm, where the heals really felt different from each other. But back to Retribution, with a lot of their ranged abilities gone, they'll be more of a melee class than before, but they won't be totally helpless at range. Judgment and a few talents will still allow them to retaliate, plus they'll have a paladin version of Heroic Leap. Both Holy and Retribution will. And that new Blade of Justice ability, which generates 2 Holy Power when you cast it, just wow. Retribution is going to be as bursty as ever. That being said, it makes me sad that Exorcism is gone. It was a Paladin spell all the way back in the Warcraft 2 real-time strategy game, which is where Paladins were first added to the Warcraft universe, and Exorcism was almost a damage spell for Paladins in Warcraft 3. Even if all Blizzard does is rename Turn Evil so that it's called Exorcism, I think Exorcism should stay in the game in one form or another, especially since Blizzard is all about class identity in this expansion. There's another thing that bugs me about Retribution, though. The only trainable AoE damage ability they have in their kits is Divine Storm. Yes, Divine Storm is iconic to the point where Uther has it in the Heroes of the Storm game, and as such it belongs in the Retribution Paladin kit, but it's a finisher. That means it won't be available all that often. And if you look at the kits of other melee DPS, you'll see that they have readily available AoE damage tools in their kits. Again, this is exactly like the problem with AoE healing I noted for Holy Paladins. And again, like in Holy's case, there are talents that can help fill that gap in, but I feel like they shouldn't need to. Talents are supposed to be optional, not optimal, so they shouldn't be needed to fill in gaps in players' baseline kits. On the subject of talents, on the whole, I like the philosophy change that they're using for talent design. Talents do more to affect playstyle, and you can spec yourself to specialize in different ways as a DPS or tank or healer. For instance, you can spec yourself to use Crusader Strike to heal more effectively, like I said before, or you can add another AoE heal to your kit, albeit one with a long cooldown. In fact, for the first time since it was introduced, Beacon of Faith has some actual competition. You remember how I complained about talents being optional, not optimal? This is a case in point of that. For pretty much all of Warlords of Draenor, Beacon of Faith has been the only viable talent at the bottom of our talent grids, but now it's actually got some competition with Beacon of the Lightbringer. That looks like it adds a ton of flexibility to a spec that won't have much flexibility in Legion, plus its plus healing benefit looks borderline overpowered. Though I'm not all that impressed with Beacon of the Savior. To be honest, that one looks like it's kind of something that I'd only use if I was either really mana conservative or if I'd overgeared the dungeon and wanted to try for some DPS for a change. That being said, I like having a damage for healing mechanic in the Holy Paladin talent tree in general. As far as professions go, so far I'm not super impressed, but this is one thing in Legion that Blizzard hasn't told us much about yet. They've told us very little about the raw materials that we'll be using in Legion, other than that daily cooldowns won't be a big part of them. So I don't know whether those elemental items I've been hoping for are going to be around. One of the things I was hoping for that we are getting as an engineer is more items that do something when you click on them. but I have mixed feelings about how it's happening. The helms that fire bullets... I'm glad that engineering is turning into a crafting profession that can sell items on the auction house, and it wouldn't surprise me if we're going to get more items like that to the point where we're competing with blacksmiths, leatherworkers, and tailors as armorers. Though, so far, all we have is head slot items that fire bullets and maybe some boots. There really should be more variety than that. Other slots we can generate, like rocket boots or spring boots that allow anyone to double jump, or gloves that dispense holy hand grenades for gnomish engineers or sticky glue bombs for goblin engineers, all of those would be really nice to have. They'd all make sense too, and, well, I've talked about the lack of dichotomy between goblin and gnomish engineering in other videos, so I won't inflate this video discussing it again, other than to say that yes, I'm hoping for it once again in Legion. There are better things to discuss anyway. For instance, there was a reason why the Tinker system came into existence in Wrath of the Lich King. Again, see my Wrench of the Lich King video for that, so I'm not sure whether engineers crafting clickable items with stats on them will really work. If the upgrade system allows these craftable helms and hopefully other pieces of armor to keep up stat-wise with gear that you can get from other content, then I'm all for it. If not, well, we were better off with Tinkers. Again, see the Wrench of the Lich King video from my While Then and Now series to see why I say that. I feel like Blizzard hasn't given us enough information about how the upgrade system works to really know whether it'll be a step up or a step down from what we have in Warlords of Draenor. I mean, mixing things up by making the upgrades new recipes instead of upgrade tokens that you right-click on to use on existing items, it has its positive aspects and negative aspects. The new system looks like it's positive in that it adds variety, it gives Blizzard a chance to put rewards at the end of some of the challenges they'll throw at us, and upgraded recipes look like they'll add a sense of progression to professions overall. But it's also negative in that you need to switch items in order to do an upgrade, rather than keeping the same item along with any tweaks you might have already put on it, like transmogrification or enchants. So, it's hard telling whether these tiered recipes will be a step up or step down from what we have in Warlords. As for artifact weapons, the artifact weapon talents look kind of like old school talents to me, except that the choices you make in progressing through these talents involve which talents you get first, not which ones you get, period. I think that kind of choice is actually pretty helpful in terms of design, which means Blizzard can set those up for min-maxing without worrying about making any one artifact talent too powerful or too weak. Unlike talent trees or talent grids, where there are mutually exclusive choices that need to be balanced with each other, every player is going to get every one of these talents. However, the relic slots leave me a little bit confused. No one type of relic slot is inherently for healing, inherently for DPS, or inherently for tanking. For instance, the life relic types are generally for healing, but not every healer has a life relic slot, and not every life relic slot is on a healing specs weapon. Blood is often used on tank artifacts, but not every tanking spec has a blood slot, and Light knows plenty of DPS weapons have blood slots on them too. The reason this confuses me is that when you get to epic level endgame content, Blizzard has released some weapons that have special side effects, and since relics are replacing weapon drops on loot tables, I figure there should be some relics that have some special side effects. I know that artifact weapons have side effects baked into them in one way or another, but there should be some special standout perks besides just higher numbers in the relics that drop in endgame content. For that reason, I'd have expected Blizzard to have more standardization in which types of relics do what. For instance, if every healer had a life slot, then Blizzard would be able to add a life relic to endgame content that has your heals have a chance to cause AoE healing as a side effect, and they'd know every healer could use it. Then again, the fact that not every spec can make use of the same type of relic is comparable to the fact that not every healer can wield a staff, or how not every DPSer can wield a sword, so maybe they can still make this system work without standardization. Unfortunately, there's not much story available for Legion yet. We do know that Gul'dan survived and that he is to Legion what Garrosh is to Warlords, a link between storylines of expansions, and that he'll be reviving Illidan, and Blizzard learned from its mistake in Warlords and they'll be making him a boss in the first patch's raid content. Thank the light for that. Making Garrosh a quest boss was a bad idea. What little we know about artifact weapons is that there'll be a story behind how you get them and why it's you who wields them. That'll help tie your character into the story of the expansion and help tie your class into the lore of Azeroth, so that's definitely a good thing. While the changes I've seen announced for Legion aren't perfect, there's quite a bit of good stuff in there, so all in all, I have to say I'm looking forward to Legion.